The state agency in charge of regulating Nevada's vast taxicab industry faces some pretty tough questions tonight. For most of this month, officers of the Nevada Taxicab Authority have focused on something other than taxis. They've been making nightly patrols in the neighborhood where their boss lives. Critics say these public employees were turned into a private security force. I-Team's George Knapp is here with that exclusive story.
I'll put it this way. Corrections officers don't investigate street crimes. School police don't set up DUI roadblocks. Like those others, taxi officers have guns and badges, but they're not cops. They're peace officers. They don't patrol neighborhoods like cops. The only crimes they're supposed to investigate involve taxis. When the I-Team was told that taxi officers had been ordered to make nightly security patrols at the home of their boss, we could hardly believe it. So we went out night after night and saw it for ourselves. In an otherwise quiet neighborhood in the southwest part of the valley, cars cruise down a dark street as if by clockwork. The processions begin just after sunset and continue through the night, often every hour on the hour. The vehicles belong to the Nevada Taxicab Authority, and the drivers are all state taxi officers, though there isn't a taxi in sight. Purple Shadow Lane is where Taxi Authority Administrator Gordon Walker lives. The officers are making their nightly, sometimes hourly rounds because Walker told them to do it. Mr. Walker's state-sponsored security patrol started at the beginning of April.
We have teachers and firefighters and everybody else being laid off for budget cuts, while the Taxicab Authority is utilizing their budget for obviously personal reasons. There's no cabs around.
Scott Lewis is a former TA officer who's been fighting for 2 years to get his job back. He says he learned about the Walker Patrol from current TA employees who resent the assignment.
Gordon Walker is using the Taxicab Authority as his private police agency, from what we can tell in this situation. And if that's not a case of wanton waste and purposeful destroying of state resources and property, then I don't know what is.
We asked the TA for a copy of any memo which ordered these nightly patrols. The agency told us they have no such order or memo. Gordon Walker declined to appear on camera, but told us he verbally authorized the patrols past his house, but only when TA officers are in the neighborhood for other official business. His neighborhood, near Russell and Rainbow, is many miles from the Strip or the airport, which are the hubs of the taxi business. But the I-Team obtained dispatch logs for a 3-day period in mid-April, and it sure looks like the drive-bys are regularly scheduled events, starting just after sundown and continuing into the night. On April 15th, the first run came at 46 minutes after midnight, with another an hour later, followed by another 45 minutes after that. The type of call was listed as administrative. The patrols resumed that night just before 9, labeled as a special assignment, with another at 10:30, then at 11:15. 1:16 and 2:45 on the morning of April 16th. Just after 8 on the night of the 16th, they started up again. The I-Team watched and recorded as they rolled past. 14 patrols in a 72-hour period. During a recent ride-along with the TA, investigator Rico Constantino told us the agency is stretched very thin and could barely handle its primary function.
We're not that big. We only have, supposed to 4 officers per shift. That's 1 supervisor. And we have to answer 8,000 square miles. There's not enough people.
Now, if you quantify this occurring for the last 3 to 4 weeks, almost every hour on the hour after sundown, then that takes about roughly 1.5 officers off the street every night.
So what taxi-related business do TA officers have in Gordon Walker's neighborhood? According to a court document filed by Walker, they're there to protect his state-owned vehicle, which had its tires vandalized 8 months ago. The patrols didn't actually start back then, though. They began April 1st, 1 day after Walker's wife received this letter purporting to be from Mr. Walker's mistress. The woman whose phone number was listed on the confessional letter flatly denies having written it, and Walker says he doesn't fool around on his wife, so he thinks someone was messing with him by writing it. And that's why he ordered the patrols to begin, so he and his wife would have some peace of mind. Is that a job for TA investigators, to patrol him and his neighborhood and keep him safe?
No, not at all. And I'm glad you pointed that out. That would be Metro. Las Vegas Metro.
TA officers are peace officers who carry badges and guns, but they aren't cops. Their job is to regulate taxis. They can exercise police powers when lives are at risk, but patrolling neighborhoods isn't something they do. At a legislative hearing last year, this same Gordon Walker testified that his officers need to be solely focused on the taxi side of the equation.
Gordon Walker would not allow us to interview him on camera because he said he had concerns about his personal safety. He agreed to answer questions submitted in writing, but didn't. He believes that Scott Lewis, who was fired by the TA 2 years ago, is responsible for vandalizing Walker's car and for writing a letter to Walker's wife. Last weekend, after Walker found out that Scott Lewis had also been out there in Walker's neighborhood, like the I-Team had, documenting the nightly patrols, Walker sought a warrant and had Lewis arrested. The entire episode was recorded on video, and tomorrow at 11, we'll show it to you. When tipster Scott Lewis decided to go out and videotape the frequent patrols, which is what the I-Team had done earlier, he set the stage for his own arrest.
It's a Taxicab Authority state vehicle. We're watching it go down Purple Shadow Lane now.
Former taxi officer Scott Lewis calmly reviews the videotape that led to his arrest on charges of conspiracy and stalking. 2 years ago, Lewis was fired from his job policing taxis at the airport. The taxi authority piled up an amazing laundry list of more than 24 allegations to justify getting rid of him. Since then, Lewis has been fighting through the system to be reinstated and has been an outspoken critic of the TA. Weeks ago, Lewis tipped off the I-Team to the fact that TA Administrator Gordon Walker had ordered taxi officers to conduct nightly patrols past Walker's home, averaging about 5 patrols per night, according to a 3-day sample of dispatch logs. The patrols started at the beginning of April and continued until Lewis was arrested last weekend, right after the I-Team spent 3 nights documenting the drive-bys.
This is Gordon's house.
On April 17th, Lewis asked a friend to drive him to the area so he could see the activity for himself and record it on a camera the size of a cell phone. He had every right to be out there on a public street and plenty of personal motivation as well.
It would be hard to delicately word the frustration I have with the rogue agency that destroyed my life. Here comes the license plate. I mean, we were anxious to document more of their conduct.
After recording 2 of the patrols through Walker's neighborhood, Lewis and his friend drove up behind a TA vehicle to record the license plate. That's when the officer noticed them and pulled them over for allegedly running a stop sign, even though TA policy says taxi cops are not supposed to issue citations to non-taxis for routine traffic stuff. Lewis let the camera run.
We are not a taxicab. You have no jurisdictional right to pull us over.
After being detained for an hour, Lewis called Metro. So did the TA, and someone alerted Gordon Walker, who came to the scene. Walker had otherwise been unaware Lewis was in the neighborhood, just as he had no idea the I-Team was present on the preceding nights.
Let's go, Scott. How you doing, Gordon?
Instead of asking Metro to investigate further, Walker once again made use of his employees. A team of TA investigators convened to put a case together against Lewis and his friend. The TA convinced a judge to issue a protective order on the grounds that Lewis had threatened Walker's life, which did not occur, and because Lewis owns guns, which he does not. A lurid and exaggerated account of the incident was prepared, and TA asked prosecutors to fast-track a criminal charge against the 2 men. The charges accuse Lewis of vandalizing Walker's car 8 months earlier, though there isn't a shred of evidence of that. And Lewis is blamed for writing a letter to Walker's wife alleging the TA boss is having romantic affairs. Again, there is nothing linking Lewis to that letter, but it was the letter that prompted Walker to order the nightly patrols.
Scott Richard Lewis, 10F07665A.
On Monday, the 2 men had to appear in court. Their defense lawyer is astonished at how such a specious allegation ever got this far.
The only thing that they can point to for the harassment would be my client being on a public roadway, using a video camera documenting everything that he's doing and documenting state employees in the dereliction of their duty.
The TA's looking for Don at his house to contact him, yet they come to my workplace and destroy me at my workplace.
Here's a guy who's trying to do the right thing. He's trying to hold people accountable for their jobs, make them do what they were either elected or appointed to do, and now for that he's having the privilege of being fired. He's been arrested. He's being, you know, if anything, the harassment goes the other way.
The complaint against Lewis paints a much different picture than what's shown on the videotape. It claims Scott Lewis was lurking behind Walker's house with surveillance equipment, that he was caught by the TA hiding in the dark and tried to drive away. The video shows otherwise. To make matters tougher for Lewis, the TA used the arrest as a reason to seek dismissal of his wrongful termination case, which was nearly finished. At a minimum, that's going to be delayed for a couple of months.
A former state taxi authority officer who blew the whistle on alleged wrongdoing within the agency claimed an important victory in court this week.
The Channel 8 I-team has chronicled the story of airport control officer Scott Lewis and his attempts to be reinstated. Lewis says he was fired because he tried to enforce the law against taxi companies. But that was just the beginning of his troubles.
And George Knapp is here with new developments in this whole story.
Well, here's the question. Should the head of a state agency have the authority to order his employees to perform services at or around the boss's home? That's what the head of the taxi authority did when he ordered taxi officers to conduct patrols past his house hour by hour, night after night. State officials, including the governor, say they're just fine with that. But when former taxi cop Scott Lewis showed up to videotape the nightly patrols, he got arrested. Yesterday, a local judge heard the evidence, or lack thereof.
I'm ecstatic. I'm very well pleased with the decision the judge came to.
Former taxi authority cop Scott Lewis has been fighting against what he describes as an out-of-control state agency for 2 years. He was in justice court Monday because his former boss, TA Administrator Gordon Walker, sought a protective order, alleging that Lewis had vandalized Walker's car and threatened him. Lewis was arrested in April after he videotaped patrols by taxi police past Walker's house. As the I-team also documented back then, Walker ordered the patrols at the beginning of April after his wife received letters from someone purporting to be Walker's mistress. The mistress wanted Mrs. Walker to know about her husband's affairs. According to an arrest warrant prepared by Walker's senior investigators, Lewis was suspected of writing the letters because, according to Mr. and Mrs. Walker, they have no other enemies. 8 months prior to the letter, someone slashed the tires on Walker's state-issued vehicle. The arrest warrant alleges it must have been Scott Lewis, though the TA and Metro say there is no evidence linking it to any suspect.
You didn't write those letters, did you?
No.
You didn't slash the tires?
No.
Did you ever call Gordon Walker's house? Did you ever go to his house?
No.
Walker not only ordered taxi officers to patrol his house in response to the mistress letters, he then had his senior staff prepare the arrest warrant once he learned Lewis had been in his neighborhood. In court, Walker, who was represented by the Attorney General's office, argued he needed protection.
I can't imagine why he was there. I was concerned about his intent. I kind of thought that Mr. Lewis may have been tied to the letters and the slashing of the tires.
Defense attorney Ron Colquitt argued Lewis and his friend had every right to be out there.
Mr. McNally and my client are driving through public roadways, not in a confined neighborhood, and they are documenting the use of these state employees to monitor this man's house.
Judge Joe Cicento made quick work of Walker's allegations. He ruled there's no proof linking Lewis to the tires or the letters, and he denied a protective order on constitutional grounds.
Although it may be objectionable to your client to have Mr. Lewis photographing these people coming down the street, it's still his right to do so, as it would be his right to picket in front of the house.
You know, that's the first time officially by a judge in a judicial matter who's seen through the smokescreen that the Taxicab Authority has done to me and wasn't taking it. He wasn't hearing it at all.
Although Lewis won this round, he still faces charges filed by Walker accusing him of stalking and harassment. The same judge will hear the same evidence in July. But what of the larger issue? Is it okay for Walker to use his state taxi cops to patrol his house instead of keeping an eye on taxis? We asked the head of business and industry, Diane Cornwall. In an email, Cornwall said she had no problem with Walker using state resources within his domain since he felt threatened. Her boss, Governor Gibbons, told us he'd heard there were threats on Walker's life and that he trusts Cornwall to deal with the issue. If using state cops for private security is okay, Scott Lewis wonders if Cornwall could order state janitors to clean her house.
We don't care about what's going on in Walker's personal life as much as how he's using the agents in his operation for his personal matters.
In a bit of unexpected irony, another taxi cop, James Dudley, who's a friend of Scott Lewis, was notified that he is now the target of an investigation by the TA because, among other things, he used a state vehicle to go to lunch across the street from his workplace. The TA says this is a misuse of state resources, unlike those patrols past Gordon Walker's house.